commandments. They've put the time and the effort to building the pattern of the tabernacle. They built all of the tabernacle. They built the table of showbread. They built the table of incense. They built the altar of sacrifice. They built the laver. They built all of the construction for the laver. They designed and built all the costumes for the Levites, the high priest, the Urim and Thummim. They built the Ark of the Covenant. They embroidered it all with these angels of golden thread woven into the fabric. All of that stuff takes, based on the biblical record, about 2 years. They're now leaving, and they come to a point where people are starting to complain that all they have to eat is this manna, manna, manna. Now, let me ask a question. When they were coming out of the Egypt, what did they have with them that wasn't human and possessions? They had livestock, they had lambs, they had things to offer to God. When they got to that point where they said, we're out of food, did they still have livestock? Did they still have sheep and lambs? Because they were making lots of sacrifices when they got to Mount Sinai. They must have had those things. So they weren't out of food if they were eating that food all the time. They hadn't slain the last animal and then said, well, we're hungry. We don't have any more food. But God gives them quail, which is a clean bird. He gives them manna. Now you take 2 years and you come to the next point. What does God give them when they start complaining that all they want is manna, manna, manna? What are they asking for? They're asking for the flesh pots of Egypt. What does God deliver to them? Quail. So much so that they went out, those who were lusting after it, and they ate so much until it was coming out of their teeth. So was God providing them the quail every single evening during this 2-year period of time? If they're saying we only have manna to eat? No, he gave that for a period of time. We don't know how many days, but then there's a period of time where they're just eating manna, and then they get to God gives them quail, and they're lusting after the quail, and they go out and slaughter a whole bunch, and then there's a plague, and people die because they're complaining against God. So when we look at the details of the story, we see things that are different. Now, when we go to Numbers chapter 11, verse 4, the mixed multitude was among them, fell a-lusting, and the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? This is their attitude after 2 years of building all the things, getting the tabernacle together, seeing God in the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. And this is this point where they say, I'm tired of manna. I want to go back to Egypt and have what I had back then. Julia.
I think a bit in life application where God takes you out of the darkness, and by that I mean like a personal version, right? For you personally. And then as he's leading you into the light, he's trying to remove, all the things in Egypt from you, right? During this process, and so we go through the sanctuary, like he gives us the sanctuary, he gives us manna stuff in Egypt, and he gives them the quail, but they over-consume it. What does it do? It leads to their destruction, right? And those that did not have this problem is able to continue on their journey in the wilderness. So that was kind of like a life application that I see that is applicable to all of us today in our wilderness experience.
Very good. So Julia was just painting a picture of the story of the children of Israel that we've been talking about, and how we also are going through things. God is trying to clean us up, get us ready for heaven. And sometimes we can want to go back to what we had rather than go forward with what God is providing. That's a very real thing that I can probably safely assume everybody has that experience where sometimes you just want to go back the way it was rather than go forward with what God is providing and moving you down the path on. Now, the word for fell a-lusting there is that word avah, which is to covet, to desire, to long for something, in this case, was bad. They wanted to go back to the Egyptian ways rather than be happy with what God was providing, which was manna every day. They had to go out and gather it. It would last for that one day. The next day, they would go out and gather it. The next day, they would go out and gather it. The next day, they would go out and gather it. And then on the sixth day, there was a miracle that there was twice as much, they would gather twice as much, and it would be the only day that it would keep. Just that miracle. But what happens when we come into places where we see, well, God's providing in a very consistent way, and yet we can sometimes get to the point where we just go, well, it's not that exciting anymore. So we want something else. We lose that sense of awe that says God is working in a mighty way. He's providing a miracle every week. And yet, I lose that sense of awe of the one who's providing it. It gets common to me. And at this point, they have this experience where they want to go backslide. Mike.
What I find baffling is these people witnessed the flame of the tower. Okay, these people witnessed the Red Sea closing on the Egyptians. These people witnessed so many things that God was doing. How could they not follow? How could they not eat manna and be grateful because this God was so powerful in the things that He was doing? We, on the other hand, have a different experience. We don't get to see this stuff. We don't get to see some of those things. So we've got to do it with our own faith.
So Mike is bringing up that they saw, the children of Israel at this point had seen the Red Sea split. They walk across on dry ground. When they get to the other side, the Egyptians' waters cover them and wipes out their enemy. No act on their part. God did that. The pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud to keep them cool during the day in the middle of the desert and to keep them warm by night. God providing manna on a miracle basis. And he's drawing the connection to, they saw all these things. How could they get to this point where they lose that sense of direction that says, God is providing for me, appreciation for him. And then he says, well, but in our day, we have to go more on faith. And I question that, Mike, because can you cite things that God has done specifically for you in a miraculous way? How are you any different than the children of Israel?
Well, because the difference in my life is I see it for what's going on for me, right? But I don't see that talent.
Okay, so you need to walk by sight, not by... Okay. You're a visual person, aren't you? Yeah. So, but you have those faith experiences when you've seen God answer prayer in miraculous ways. Should that not have that same appreciation and lasting effect as seeing a pillar of fire every day?
Absolutely, but the things that I see are, that was unbelievable. Those things that happen are unbelievable. Just somebody, the man on a daily basis is unbelievable. Over so many years, you were able to eat whatever. But today, it's not as magnificent. It's still wonderful. The things that have happened in my life that I see happening on a daily basis.
But the further away from those experiences where God has done something miraculous, does it grow cold over time?
No.
That you think about it less and less over time?
No, because I'm relying on it. I try to rely on God. I try to put my trust in God. In whatever, when I'm talking about obstacles, I'm talking about problems in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I put my trust in God that these will get resolved. These things will get resolved somehow, some way. Yeah, and they do. And sometimes I'm impatient. Okay, I'm impatient for those see that it being resolved. When I look back over time, I see the results. God's been there in a entire way.
And I think the same was true for the children of Israel, because every Passover they would sacrifice the lamb to remind them of what great deliverance God had done in bringing them out of Egypt. They even had that institutionalized once a year. Go back and remember that. Talk about it every day. Teach your children this, who has delivered you through miraculous senses. And you're following the same process then, that you're reminded of looking back on your past and seeing how God has worked in the past that can help me now as I'm facing a challenge that I need to make a decision on, so that I am reminded of how he's worked in the past so I don't worry about what. It gives me that ability to hope when others might despair. Because you know he's going to work because he's been faithful at working in the past. And he is even now working on a solution to the problem that you've got. Okay. Time is not my friend. So we talked a little bit about Satan, and the beginning of the problem was covetousness. That's what was in his heart that led him to be a murderer from the beginning, the desire to overthrow God so that he could bring the thought process that he should receive worship rather than just God alone, putting himself above where he belonged. And he didn't have the problem of having sinned before. He was created a perfect being. Then we get to the story of Achan, which is the story of Joshua, where the story of Jericho, where most of us are familiar with Jericho, right? There is this walled city. They're coming across. Joshua goes to God. He meets the commander of the Lord's army, and he's wondering, well, how am I supposed to? And so the big city, Joshua, the commander of the Lord's army, which is the pre-existent Christ, tells him, well, here's how you do it. You march everybody around the city once for 7 days. But on the seventh day, you march around it 3 times. And then you drove. Now, what happened when the trumpets blew on the 7th day? The walls came tumbling down. There's a song about that people learn in all the divisions coming up. So many people are familiar with that song, even if they may not have read that story for quite a while. But the instruction was to destroy when those walls came down, except for Rahab, because there was a red string that was in her area because she helped the spies. But they were to destroy every man, woman, and child, all of the livestock, the goods, the silver and the gold, they were to take to the temple of the Lord, but everything else was to be burned and destroyed. That was the instruction. This is the first conquering conquest as they go in to take over the land. How many people followed that instruction? Everybody but one person. What did Achan do? What did he hold back for himself? A goodly Babylonian garment, some silver, and some gold. What did he do with that? He hid it under. So he coveted it, he hid it, and then he thought, nobody will know. And then I can bring it out sometime down the road and I will be okay. Ralph.
All of the gold and the silver was supposed to go to the temple. And not only was he coveting, but he was robbing God.
Exactly. So Ralph is bringing up that all of that silver and gold was to go to the temple